Welcome to Champion Stepdad Podcast. We are exploring the unique role of stepdads and how to apply performance psychology skills to become better father figures and role models, building our band of brothers by focusing on empathy and accountability. My name is Neil Wattier. I'm your host, and I am a 16-year stepdad. I'm also a resilience trainer and a performance consultant, encouraging you to join the Champion Stepdad Facebook group, get involved, and build your band of brothers. We have focused a lot on really important skills and concerns that you've had and how to negotiate and navigate being a stepdad, being a new dad, being an experienced dad, conflict, opportunities, all the things that are very important to us as stepdads. Today, we're going to take a little bit of a step back and reinforce the idea that it doesn't always have to be so serious. Sometimes the answers to things like communication and connection can be super simple, and we're overlooking really basic, simple opportunities such as sitting down and playing a game. My guest today is Nick Cardarelli. He is the host of Raised on D&D podcast. He's been gaming for over 30 years. He's the founder of Lakeland Role Playing Guild, and which has just celebrated its 20th anniversary. And he has even gone and published a role-playing module himself. He's a spouse and a dad. He has 3 kids. He's educated with a degree in interpersonal and organizational communication, and is a adjunct professor as well. Nick and I really get into the idea of games, any kind of games. I was also raised on D&D, so that's what caught my attention of this podcast. My brother was always a big gamer back in the 80s, and when Dungeons and Dragons was this big controversy of should we allow kids to play or not. And luckily, my parents were of those people that, kids are going to do what kids are going to do. We might as well let them be creative. And although my parents weren't the type of people that would sit down and play games with us, they provided many, many opportunities, not only buying the games, but creating space. We always had space where we could go, and it was our place, and our friends were always welcome. And we would spend hours in these, usually in the basement, and sometimes overnight, and they would buy us pizza and Mountain Dew, and we would just go at it for hours and hours and hours. And I have so many amazing memories of my brothers and I and our friends, and even sometimes our relatives or uncles or our brothers, the extended family. We just have so many memories of just sitting down and being creative, and sometimes it was a board game. I mentioned a couple of times in the show about Monopoly, and how, man, I can't even remember that time when we actually completed a Monopoly game because there was so much competition and cheating and fighting and arguing and flipping the table. But then there were also the times where we would play these collaborative games where it wasn't competition with each other. We were building a community, our own clan, our own guild, or whatever you want to call it. And it just gave us an opportunity to just leave everything else behind and create this alternate persona in this alternate world and just go out and experience something together. And it was really, really exciting. And we did build friendships. We did build relationships. My brothers and I still occasionally talk about, hey, you remember that time? Or, hey, people are starting to play, online or through Zoom or whatever, all these opportunities to just build community. And I think it's a great discussion. And we laugh a lot during this conversation. And it's just it's a good reminder that it doesn't always have to be so serious. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Nick Cardarelli, and I encourage you to look up his podcast, Raised on D&D. Nick Cardarelli, thanks a lot for joining me on the Champion Stepdad podcast. It's great having you on the show.
Neil, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Now, I'm really excited for this one because we have so many like real serious topics. Because I'm a psychology student, get my master's degree, and we're all parents, and we're talking about all the tragedies that go along with parenting, and all the things of imposter syndrome, and am I doing it right, and what am I messing up my kids? And here we are. We had a great episode. We're just going to talk about gaming and how to connect with kids through games. So
it's fantastic. And what's great is that if you do it wrong, you can do some trauma with gaming too. So that's terrific.
And so your background primarily in role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, right? Tabletop, lay it all out, have the books, build the characters. And I think that's great because, as much as it was looked down upon and you were all, gaming nerds when we were kids, when I was a young kid, my brother was the game master and we played Dungeons and Dragons and Indiana Jones and Car Wars. And like, I remember all these names are starting to come back to me. And it was just, man, we had so much fun. I remember sitting in the basement with 8 or 9 guys with pizza and Mountain Dew, and you're just going as long as you can all night long, and it was just a blast. And so I would imagine that with young kids, it's not quite like that yet, but it's still that idea of just like, let's just get together and use our imagination.
It's fantastic. And I'll tell you something. We just celebrated 11 years of playing Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role-playing games as a family. And so I've gotten to go from having those teeny tiny little elementary age children around the table, and we're playing games like Mermaid Adventures where everyone's a different kind of mermaid, okay, and things like that. Camp Myth, where they're all at a summer camp, but they're all mythical creatures like minotaurs and cyclopses and things like that. So we started off with games of that style. And then as they grew, we were able to go into more mature games that are not only more complicated systems, but also with some more mature content. So we're in the holiday season for Spooktober, right? So the last Halloween weekend, we were able to play our very first game of the horror RPG Call of Cthulhu. And we started off with a real mild adventure, but it was pretty scary and the kids had a great time. And so we've gone all the way from the kiddie RPGs all the way to, more teenager appropriate role-playing games.
And that's great because there is a ton of variety out there. You can get real simple, real creative. There's some that are a little bit edgy. But even I found with, my 2-step kids at 7 and 9-year-old, like they're with Halloween coming up, like one of them wants to be Mike Myers and he's getting all into it. And he's like, oh, this weekend we got to watch the 2018 version of Halloween. And I'm like, I'm looking at my wife and I'm like, are you okay with this? And she didn't answer. So we talked about it later. She's like, honestly, like as long as they're not, off, killing cats in the driveway and, having nightmares or something, she's like, what's the big deal? And same thing. I think like, when we were kids, it was Nightmare on Elm Street and, Halloween was the originals and stuff like that. I'm like, we were watching it at that age. So what am I so worried about?
That's right. Mine said, we want to watch the original 1978 Halloween. And I said, you better bring a pillow and a blanket because you guys aren't going to last to the exciting part because these kids, they can't do exposition and rising action. They can't do any of that. They're like, where's the action? Where's the special effects? I'm like, you guys aren't going to be able to make it through. I'm not worried about you being scared. I'm worried about you passing out.
So that's an interesting point then. So, because a lot of times with your table games, it's kind of an extended process. So yes, how have you found what's been your experience trying to get, detached from the instant gratification and the go of YouTube and Xbox and PlayStation to sit down and have this creative world that they, for the most part, have to imagine? How do you make that happen?
So when you're first starting out, especially with kids, and especially younger kids like your stepchildren's age, you want to start off with pre-made characters, because you remember from back in the day, we would sit there for 5-6 hours pining through books, trying to decide, do I want to be an elf? Do I want to be a dwarf? Do I want to be a knight?
One
do I
night
want
just
to be
to
a
create a
wizard?
character.
Just to be one night, just to create a character, right? So they're not ready for that right out of the gate. So what I always recommend to parents, what's wonderful about this era of tabletop role-playing games being mainstream, it's being popular, they come now in box sets. And the box sets are great. They give you an adventure, they give you basic rules, they give you pre-made characters, and that's a big time saver right there. So the kids can look through the characters, they can say, hey, that looks like something I'd like to play. And then you sit down and you can go. So that's a big thing right there, is to skip the character generation until they're really hooked and they really enjoy it. The other thing that I recommend is to not start off at first level. So fans of role-playing games will remember, when you first start off at first level, you run into a band of goblins and you could end up dead, right? And there's the end of the fun right there. So with younger kids or with just new players, I like to start off with a little bit higher level. They have a little more power. They've got a little more things that they can do. They got a few more options when they run into that band of goblins. And also, I always try to relate it to something more mainstream, or if I can, use a game that goes with their interests or their fandoms. So let me ask you, Neil. We're talking about Halloween and how they're excited about Mike Myers and things like that. But what kind of fandoms do they really like? Do they like Harry Potter? Do they like Star Wars? Do they like Marvel superheroes? What would you say?
I would say that they're mostly into probably getting in more into like the video games. So one of them is huge Fortnite, the other one's huge Call of Duty.
Oh, that's terrific.
Yeah.
So Fortnite, Call of Duty. Now, first off, Fortnite. My youngest one is 12 and a half, turning 13, and he is all about Fortnite. He's got a ton of skins. He loves to play it. And he loves to do all the customizations with the back bling and things like that. So there's a lot of characters in Fortnite, a lot of skins that they use that are themed. And Call of Duty, fantastic game. You're playing soldiers, you're fighting terrorists, all that stuff's fun. So one of the things that you can do is you can actually just pick a game that matches those genres. So maybe they're not into Lord of the Rings and sword and sorcery. So sitting them down and saying, here's a broadsword and here's a magic wand, they might be like, well, what do I do with this? But if you sit them down and you either do a sci-fi game or even a modern warfare game. There's a game by Palladium Books called Recon, where you get to play soldiers and things like that. You can customize that game to be like a Call of Duty mission. And one of the nice things about a role-playing game is you set the time frame. You don't have to do marathon sessions like we did when we were kids and do the whole night or the whole weekend and go through the 2-liter of Mountain Dew just to make it to the end of the game session, right? You can say, okay, we're going to play a role-playing game. We're going to play for an hour and a half. And I always recommend to parents who are starting tabletop role-playing games, you really want to listen. And you really want to focus in on any good game master should focus in on the players. But especially when you're a parent and you're trying to play these games with your children, you want to kind of focus in on their cues. So, and always leave them excited. If they beg you to go for another 30 minutes and you said, we're going to do an hour or an hour and a half, and they beg you for another 30 minutes, say, don't worry, we can pick this up again next time.
The cliffhanger.
And yes, so much better than playing until they're just fed up, wore out, or they start making poor decisions. Leave them on an upswing. Don't leave them captured by the bad guys, that kind of thing, if you can help it. And leave them on an upswing where they're winning. But hey, we've reached the end of our session, so we've got to come back to it.
That's a good point. And I guess I've done that and didn't even realize I was doing that, because like, especially with the 7-year-old, he loves table games, and we'll play Monopoly Junior is his new favorite. He always wants to play Life. I absolutely hate that game though. But so we'll play Monopoly Junior and some of the other ones similar to that. And we'll play 2 or 3, and I'll tell him, and he'll be like, "Oh, let's play again." And I'm like, "No, we said we were going to play 2. We ended up playing 3. So let's cut it off." And yeah, you're right. Like, it leaves a little bit of a cliffhanger, and they just want a little bit more. So whether you roll into another game and then they carry that excitement forward, or you just put it away and they're just thinking about, oh, we ended the game and It was just so much fun. You're right. Like, that's the way to do it, because you don't want to play till they're, exhausted and they're like, yeah, I don't want to do that again. So that's actually a really good point. And while you were talking, I had a funny thought, because, they recently had, I don't know if it was the Disney or the Pixar, it's a Disney movie called Onward. And it was about the resurrection of magic in this kingdom or in this world where they had all these creatures that ended up forgetting how to use magic, because everything like electricity and power and all that stuff. So everybody forgot about it. And then these 2 brothers went on this quest and rediscovered magic. And we've watched it with the boys, and I love that show. I'm such a huge fan of that movie. So it wouldn't be a stretch to tell them, hey, like, Onward or Call of Duty or Fortnite, and just say, hey, we're going to do something similar to that, but we're going to sit down at the table, and I want you, and it's almost like you might have to prep them a little bit and be like, all right, so it's going to be a little bit different, but I just want you to use your imagination. And if you haven't set them up, you might have to help them through the process a little bit. But we've been really good, especially lately. I live in Phoenix, and the weather's starting to cool down. So of course, to go outside and play is a lot better. And, because it's not 115 degrees, it's only 90. It's that idea of, no, we're going to unplug this weekend. And so we've done that a couple times recently. And I think that might be, maybe over the next month or 2 might be a good time to introduce a little bit more variety and a little bit more depth than, just Uno or Monopoly, and actually get into some of these games where they have to create a world in their mind.
Well, and the fantastic thing you mentioned, Onward by Disney's Pixar. What's incredible about that is the story actually centers around the 2 brothers, and one of the brothers is a big tabletop role-playing game fan, right? And he has a game called Quests of Yore. Well, on a recent episode of Raised on D&D podcast, where I'm the host, I got to interview the game design manager who actually created Quests of Yore for Pixar. They got brought to the studios. They actually talked to the people who created the movie, and they said, we don't want you to make a game about the movie. We want you to make the game that is featured in the film. Nice. So if you're like my family and you guys are big fans of Onward, you can actually buy this Quest of Yore box set, and it's got everything you need in it: miniatures, maps, characters, adventure, rules. It's all in one package, which is, I love that. If the kids have seen that movie, it immediately is like we were talking about. It goes right into something that they're familiar with, and they're able to start imagining and playing and things like that.
So right before we came on the show, you were kind of giving me a rundown, and you talked about you've been gaming for over 30 years, and I'm about the same, not consistently. Like I've been on a break, but I'm looking to get back into it now.
Yeah.
So you're out of Brandon, Florida. Is that correct?
I'm actually in Lakeland, Florida.
Lakeland. Okay.
Yep.
So tell the listeners about the gaming guild, the playing guild that you were telling me about.
Sure. So it's a funny story. I'll tell you the short part of it. I'm 21, 22 years old. I'm living on my own. I've got a great corporate job. And I want to find some people to game with. So, of course, I go to my local comic book shop, and I'm looking around, and they have a billboard. The billboard's not even on a wall. It's like on the floor, leaned against a pillar. there's the corners of notebook paper just ripped off, and it says, call Bob to play D&D, thumbtack. And I'm looking at this going, this can't be all there is. So long story short, I end up working with the clerk at the gaming store, bouncing ideas around. And I say, listen, what I want to do is I want to create a gaming club that isn't attached to a store and isn't attached to a game company. So we could play any tabletop role-playing games. We could, everyone from the area can join. And what ended up happening was we created something that's lasted 20 years. It's part of the Lakeland, Florida gaming community. And it created an organization that averaged 35 to 40 paying members every year. We met. We started off meeting monthly, and within 4 or 5 years, we were meeting every 2 weeks. We had outdoor activities, which was funny for role players. But we had family picnic day, where we went to like a park. We went to movie events together. So the whole group would go and descend on some poor movie theater in our town and fill all the seats. And we'd go watch The Lord of the Rings or that horrible 2001 D&D movie, all those things. Right. And we had holiday parties, and we had workshops where we taught people how to run games for different kinds of tabletop RPGs, like Dungeons and Dragons, obviously, but also things like Shadowrun, Vampire the Masquerade, Call of Cthulhu, all these different types of games, Mutants and Mastermind superhero game. So we taught people how to run those games, and we also exposed people to more games than just maybe their home game group would have allowed them to experience.
That's awesome. So you took something that easily have connection with, some family, maybe some friends, where that's how I was raised. You build this thing into a community where you're exposing people to opportunity, to be creative, right? Because that's what we're talking about. Is it's fun. It's a way to expand your mind, use your creativity, which is never a bad thing. But then on top of that, you're going beyond the game and now building community and relationship based on this thing, and then it becomes bigger from that. So I'm really impressed that you've done it for so long. You said you just passed your 20th anniversary. And you said you ran it for a short period of time. So what was it like running that type of community? Like, is that like like an HOA or something like that? Like conflict and, what's it like trying to run something like that?
So trying to organize gamers is like herding cats. We're used to groups of 6 to 8 at the most. And so when we had an organization of 35, 40 members, what that basically translated to about 5 to 6 game tables of RPGs being played twice a week in a large venue. So I was the president for 6 years. My predecessor, or my successor, he took over, and he's been running it now for these past 14 years and doing an amazing job at that. But it was difficult at times. Some of the challenges that we ran into was obviously the having the space. We had no problem with growth because there was a hunger in the community for this kind of outreach. People were trying to find people to fill their tables, because especially as adults, it's very difficult to find people to game with on a regular basis. And one of the nice things about the Lakeland Role Playing Guild was you could come to this venue, you could come to this event, you could sit down at any table, come to a game, and you could kind of get to know people around the table. And you could say, well, this person and I, we really connect. And I think I'd feel comfortable having Neil in my house rolling dice with me on a Saturday night. And then you'd meet other people and you go, no, that person's not for me, right? But you didn't have to get them in your home to find that out. So that was a big aspect of it. But the other thing about the community and the trying to organize it was safety. So especially when we started to get a variety of people from different generations, and then we started to get families, when we reached that point of growth, that it wasn't just 15 single dudes. When women started joining and they were either single or they were couples, or they were spouses. And then when children started to join, that created a new challenge. So we ended up starting a membership vetting process, which even included a background check. So we made sure that the people that you were gaming with in the gaming community were safe. And thankfully, out of all the members that we had over all the years that I was president, we only had to deny membership to maybe 3 or 4. And that was the extent. And for the most part, everyone got along and behaved. And of course, large groups, people clicked up, but that was kind of the point.
Yeah, you meet people that you connect with and you build your community within a community. Like,
That's
some
right.
people look at it as a bad thing, but I don't. Anywhere you go, from a team to a job to, being in the military for so long, like, yeah, you're gonna find people that you just connect with better than others, and that's okay. So thinking back to my youth, I remember a lot of the urban legends and a lot of the detractors and people that didn't want. They looked down on you for playing, not because they didn't like the game, but because of all the rumors of people killing each other. And you never really knew what was true. You didn't have the internet to look up, so all you heard was what you heard. And
That's right.
Nancy next door doesn't like her kid playing D&D. Did you ever have any problems with that over the years where people were like, oh, that's bad, you shouldn't do that?
Sure. So I grew up in the Deep South in the Bible Belt, through the tail end of the Satanic Panic, which is what that time period is called, where there was everyone thought that if you played Dungeons and Dragons, you were literally worshiping the devil, summoning demons, and people were committing suicide. Right. So it was so bad, in fact, that one of the games that we started off with was a game called Palladium Fantasy by Palladium Books. Well, Palladium Fantasy is a wonderful game. It's very similar to Dungeons and Dragons in the fact that it's, sword and sorcery, elves and dragons and whatnot, right? So you'd be in junior high reading this book, and someone would come up to you with that condescending tone and say, "Is that Dungeons and Dragons?" And you'd say, "No, it's Palladium Fantasy. See, it says right on the cover, it's totally different, nothing like Dungeons and Dragons." And they would go away. But yeah, we had those the problems. The other thing you always were, because as you know, teenagers can get hyper focused on their hobbies, right? So you can invest a lot of time into games like role-playing games, because not only are you reading the books, reading the adventures, learning the rules, but one of the wonderful things, one of the reasons I wanted to share my passion for tabletop role-playing games with my children was because I knew that tabletop role-playing games feed creativity, imagination, and also an interest in knowledge. It falls into so many subjects. Not only does it inspire creative things like art, but it inspires how heavy is full plate armor. If my character is riding on a horse and I fall and I have full plate armor, how the rules say I take this much damage, but how would that actually work? And aren't I wearing padding underneath? Let me look it up. And back in our day, we had to look it up in books and libraries. But now you're Googling it, right? How's it way? Now you can watch a video about it. But I've seen that in my own children. that the tabletop role playing experience has made them go, how does a catapult work? If my character has a 50 caliber Beretta and he tries to shoot the dragon, well, what kind of damage should it do? You know, that kind of thing. So that is a kind of a side effect of the fun of having everyone around the table bonding, doing that cooperative storytelling. Is it transcends the table, and it feeds their interest and their love of knowledge.
So so tell me again, how old are your children?
So I have 3 teenagers right now. I have a 15-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a soon-to-be 13-year-old. They're little stair steps. They're all 17 months apart.
And you guys, and they've been playing since they were young?
So it really started off with bedtime stories that became kind of interactive. A lot of people know the Adam Sandler movie Bedtime Stories.
Bedtime Stories, yes.
Right. Where the kids kind of interrupt him and they change the story, right? So it kind of started that way with my children. Not only did they want to change the story, but then they'd have special requests. They'd want their favorite characters crossing over in the story, and then later on they'd want to be in the story themselves. So we had a lot of nights where the Scooby Gang and the bridge crew of the USS Enterprise are working together on a mystery, and then my kids want to be in there and they want to help. And remember, they're like 3, 4, and 5 at this time. So one day I'm left alone. I got in trouble for this. When they're yours, you can't say babysitting, right? But I got left babysitting my kids. My wife went off, and I had the 3 little ones all together, and I had watched all the Teletubbies, all the Doodle Bops that I could stand. And I was like, what can I do with them to kill some time? So I laid out maps. I brought out a bunch of miniatures. I got some character sheets. Only the 5-year-old at the time could even read. And I had to get the enlarged dice for the youngest one so he wouldn't choke. And I sat down. I just told and this is what I tell parents, just do an encounter when they're that little. Just do an encounter. And an encounter versus an adventure versus a campaign basically means an encounter is a scenario. And Neil, you mentioned you're in the military. Is that right?
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for your service. And I know that in military training, you have a lot of scenario-based training, right? If this happens, if this emergency happens, we have to do this, right? And a lot of careers now do use role playing. They may not have dice and people aren't wearing wizard hats, but they do have scenario-based training. So basically what I did was I put the miniatures out. We had kind of more of like a war game, like this is the bad guys, these are you, and we're going to roll dice and we're going to see how it all plays out and that kind of thing. And that's where it started. We played for maybe an hour. I think that we went a little over an hour. And then they had enough. I paid attention to that. I went, okay, they're winding down. And then we went ahead and took it from there. So that's how we started playing tabletop role-playing games together.
So how do they handle the balance between the desire to be on YouTube and Xbox and iPads and iPhones or whatever it is they got going on, like the immediate gratification type heavy feed versus the slow down creative thinking and teamwork stuff on a tabletop? How do you balance that? Because it's not something where you're going to say, yeah, we're not going to do that. It's got to be more of an inclusion thing. So how do you work that out?
So lots of people like to say, they like to say to me, oh, Nick, well, you raised your kids from teeny tiny on these kind of games, so obviously they're more apt to play those and not want to play electronics. That is not true. Electronics are instant gratification. They are highly addictive. They are designed that way. And we all enjoy them for that reason. So what we experienced was we found out later on as they got older, not so much when they I'd say about 7 or 8. That's when the conflict started coming, right? They want their alone time. They want their individual gaming. They've got their friends on the internet they want to hang out with, things like that. So it was hard to bring them to the table. But one of the things that tabletop role-playing games does that video games can't do is anything could happen. Anything could happen. I set up a scenario that's very much like 100 different video games. You're all heroes, and there's this bad guy, and you've got to save the citizens before the timer goes off and there's an explosion, right? So there's the scenario. In a video game, though, your options are so limited. It's only going to allow you to do what the programming does. Now, when we were kids, you were only going in a horizontal line in one direction, right? Now, video games are very complicated. They're actually based on Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games now. And that's why you have all these options. But when you're at the table, your imagination is the limit. And also, you're bouncing ideas off of each other. So you're not stuck in a box as you get the confines of the rules, but the dungeon master is the interpreter of the rules, and he's the referee. And a big secret is the rules are not as important as the fun. So when the kids come up with a great idea, you don't want to shut that down with a no. You want to say, okay, you can do that, but, right? And that but is usually, I'm going to need you to roll, or that but is well, how would you say that kind of thing. And so that camaraderie that they have at the table that you and I experienced growing up with family and close friends, they're experiencing that with siblings and their parents. And what I'm hoping, and a lot of my guests that have been on Raised on D&D podcasts have told me, who have adult children and older children, and just like you shared with me earlier, Neil, about, those board game times with your family brings them back when they're older. And that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that when they get older, they might swing by dad's on the weekend to play some tabletop role-playing games, spend some time with us.
Yeah, I think that's great. And the idea of building ultimately the thing that I loved about the potential of this conversation was connection, right? How people are always talking about, how do I better connect with my kids, and how do I better discipline my kids, and how do I get my kids to do what I want them to do, or how do I encourage them to be creative and go do stuff like, and all of those questions are essentially answered by the same thing: is meet them where they're at and encourage them outside their comfort zone, and then spend time with them, encourage them to grow, to be who they want to be, or to explore who they are and who they want to be. And at the same time, show them options of what they could be, right? And all the options out there, all that requires connection and is encouraged by connection. And so how do you connect with people? And it comes down to, you got to show interest in them, and show interest in them and show them why they should be interested in you, right? Like, you don't have to be the Disneyland dad. And I think that you've proven that, like, and the interaction is just, hey, let's sit down and read a story and let's be creative. What kid doesn't like that? And my son is 26 years old. He's a huge Harry Potter fan. He loves board games, and he's, and that's something that we share in all of my kids. We share in that, because when Brandon was young, he was just learning to read. That's when Harry Potter was big. So I got Harry Potter, and he would read a little bit, and then I would read a whole bunch. Right. So I ended up becoming a fan because I was reading the books and I loved the stories. It was amazing. Like, they were painting this picture of this amazing world, right? It wasn't just a story. They were creating a world. And that's where a lot of these games allow you to do that. They push beyond just how many figures can you fit on the board, which is a fun game, by the way, but it's expanding into this huge, amazing world where you're only limited by your creativity. And, so, screw the rules. We're going to do this tonight, and we're going to make it happen. And the ability for them to get involved and have so much fun. And then you're giggling together and you're exploring things together. And, oh yeah, remember that last week when we did that thing? That's the way that you build connection. And people say, well, how do you have a good relationship with your kids? Sit down and play a game with them, and I was raised in a house that was very confrontational and aggressive. And my parents didn't sit down and play games with us. They bought us all kinds of games. They bought us all kinds of toys. We had a lot of opportunities. My parents did the best they could with what they had. And so I give them credit for that. What I've tried to improve upon what I experienced is the ability to shut my phone off, shut the TV off, or maybe put it on in the background, with Onward in the background. And hey, we're going to have game night tonight. And the kids say, no, I want to go play on my iPad. Nope. Tonight's game night. Mom says she wants to play games. We're playing some games.
and one of the suggestions that both my wife and I did with our children, and my children have repeatedly enforced during the interviews that I've had with them on Raised on D&D podcast, because I have featured them individually, is we would make an event of it. So, Friday night game night can't always happen, right? And kids are busy, especially when you have a lot of out of the house activities, right? They've got sports, they're doing track, they're doing basketball, they're doing all these things. And you're going in all these different directions. Then there's schoolwork, and then mom and dad are both working, and it's hectic, right? So it's great if you can have that, hey, Tuesday nights or every third Tuesday is a game night. That's great. If you can't, though, I recommend having it be a party. And what we do is we throw like a theme. So I'll give you an example. We were exploring different mythologies with tabletop role-playing games. So instead of having your typical Arthurian English kings and knights and dragons, we went ahead and we played a game where we were in Polynesia, and we were basically going from island to island, dealing with these parodies of real Polynesian cultures, and interacting with their mythological monsters and deities and things like that. Well, to get the kids excited about it, we went to the dollar store and bought a bunch of luau decorations. Nice. Okay. And yes. we had Hawaiian punch, and we had pigs in a blanket and those kind of things. So we made it a little party, and it was just for us. We didn't invite anybody else over. It was just the family. And we got those scratchy plastic leis, necklaces of flowers, and we gave each of the kids the leis, and we sat down and we played this Polynesian adventure. And it's those kind of things when you're playing with younger kids, even as young as 6 and 7, when they become teenagers, they're not going to remember every moment like you do when playing the game. They're not going to remember every conflict in the adventure, every triumph, every victory, whatever. What they're going to remember is that mom and dad sat down with us. They spent time with us. They focused on us, and we all had a whole lot of fun together. And they will remember certain things. You will have those stories where you say, you remember that one time when there was that troll and you did this and I did that. You're going to have that. I remember almost all of their adventures from when they were teeny tiny till last month, but they only remember a few, a sprinkling of them. But what they remember is we have a great time with our parents. And these people who invested time and invested attention and open communication, these are the people I can talk to. These are the people I can go to. And that's what everybody wants. And that's one way of getting it. You were talking about communication, and I am a communications major. So, and it's actually quite recent that I finished my degree. I went back to school as an adult and got my degree. And but
congrats, by the way, because I'm doing the same thing.
Oh, thank you. Great. You'll get there. You'll get there. It just feels like forever, right? So that's just recently happened for me. But I chose communications really because of my background in tabletop role-playing games. And also it's something that we've focused on with our children. And if you get a chance to listen to Raised on D&D podcast and you listen to the very first episode, is very raw. It's not cleaned up very much at all, but it's between me and my daughter. And at the time she was about 13 years old. And one of the things that surprised me as we started to talk about tabletop role-playing games and her experience growing up on them was she told me how it helped her learn how to interact with people, because again, it's scenario-based training, right? In a almost consequence-free environment. So when she would talk to a shopkeep in a medieval village, and she had that interaction, that role play aspect, it helped her, she said, when she needed to go to a store and ask for help and ask a clerk where something was, or maybe negotiate a price on something. And it was so incredible. I got to share this quick story with you. It was so incredible. We went to a little Asian market here in town, and my daughter is real into health and wellness and all that stuff. So she was looking for kombucha, and for the very first time. And we're just supportive, and we're like, I'm not drinking that, but I'll go with you, right? and she walks in, and this little lady comes out of the back, and the place is named after the owner, right? And she comes walking out of the back, and she looks like she's like 100 years old. And my daughter walks right up to her, and she goes, "Oh, are you so-and-so?" And the lady's like, "Yes, I am." And she's like, "Hi, I am Alexandria, and I just wanted you to know I've been wanting to come to your store for such a long time, and I'm looking for this." And me and my wife just look at each other like, who is this person? And who is this teenager who just walks up to the owner of the store, puts out her hand, says, "Hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm so glad to meet you." And it's partially because her mother is very charismatic, very personable, and she showed her how to interact with people. But she attributed that to her experience at the game table, playing tabletop role-playing games and getting to role play out social situations. And it helped her, she said, to be a better communicator.
That's something that I never would have thought of, but you're absolutely right. I mean, because, even last month in the class that I was taking for my master's degree in performance psychology, one of the things that we were doing was we were role playing. One person was the client, one person was the consultant. And we actually had to talk about real world things. And we were essentially going through performance consulting with each other in a role playing. But the point of it was so you could get practice working with somebody. And the idea that, whether you're talking about, business leadership classes, military leadership classes, communication, drama in school, drama classes in school, the idea of role playing a scenario is practice. And it makes me think of there's actually a performance skill called simulation. A lot of people like to think of visualization, right? People say, visualize it and it'll happen. Okay, that's great. But visualization is one sense, right? You're seeing something. So in performance psychology and sports psychology, we teach people to simulate. So I want you to close your eyes and I want you to see, but I also want you to hear the crowd or whatever the scenario is. I want you to smell, if you're a football player, I want you to smell the grass and the mud. I want you to smell the sweat and the blood or whatever it is. Like, I want you to completely immerse yourself in that situation and simulate doing it so that when you get there, you're more likely going to be more comfortable because your brain doesn't know the difference between what's real and what you tell it is real. And that in itself, that one little sentence is, I could turn that into an hour presentation, like of how you trick your mind, but also how your mind tricks you. Right. So, when people talk about your perception of the world is whatever you see it as, that's the truth, because we can perceive things, the same scenario, and you're going to look at it different than I will. And it's all about your beliefs, your experiences, your thoughts, your behaviors, like all this stuff comes into how you view the world. And so if you can close your eyes and you can simulate something happening, you can create a scenario in your mind that in the future, this is what's going to happen. So therefore you're prepared to do it. And that was, I did that real clumsy. That wasn't, don't copy that and put it anywhere, because that was a horrible way of explaining it. But you see what I'm getting? Like, your brain takes these images and these simulations, and I could see how, that role-playing scenario would help somebody to, okay, now I can go out and I can talk to somebody because I've been role-playing that I've been talking to somebody, because that was the fun thing when we talk about using our creativity. It's not just about creating this world. It's, who am I? I'm not Neil anymore. I'm whatever my character's name. And he's a halfling or an elf, or he's a, warrior, carrying a broadsword. And like, we create this image of who we want to be. And we're putting ourselves into a scenario, and we're completely imagining what our character is going through.
And 9 times out of 10, when people are playing tabletop role-playing games, they're creating characters who are alter egos. What I like to do when I'm so I don't get to game on a regular basis. So typical gamers, they have a close group of friends, about 4 or 5 friends, and they meet maybe once a week, and they play for about 4 hours, and they play a series of adventures that create a campaign. I don't get to do that, unfortunately, because of time constraints. Even with my family, we have done 2 campaigns where they actually created characters. They got to that point where they wanted to make their own characters. And then we started at first level and we went all the way up and we finished about 12th or 15th level. What I still game with my adult friends, and I still game with adult family, but I'm only able to game about once every 3 months. So about once a quarter, I run a 4-hour session. It's what we call a one shot. So it's an adventure that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it kind of wraps up by the end of the 4 hours. The characters are pre-made or they're custom pre-mades. And so you just sit down with your character and you get to play. Well, one of the things that I always try to make it a point to do is I love introducing new people to the hobby. So at those quarterly one-shot adventures, I will almost always have 1 or 2 people who have never played or haven't played in like 10, 15 years. And they will sit down at the table. And what that does, it helps everybody. Because if I said to you, Neil, your band of heroes rush into the inn and it's on fire and there are hobgoblins and they're attacking the patrons. Well, you as an experienced role player know that hobgoblins are these nasty little buggers who are covered in armor. They have really well equipped weapons, and they're very organized. These aren't your regular goblins. No, these are hobgoblins, and they're dangerous. Okay. So, but when you're a new player, a hand goes up at the table and somebody says, I'm sorry, what's a hobgoblin?
What are we doing here? What's
what's going on? We're at an inn, like the Holiday Inn, that sort of thing. So what that does is it forces me as the game master to come out of my comfort zone and use descriptors and say, along the road, this muddy roadway, there is a wooden medieval building. There's lots of horses out front, but you can see inside that there's a fire. People are running out screaming. And as you enter, there are these short, 4-foot tall, orange, long, pointy-eared creatures with armor, and they have swords, and one of them is shouting orders to each other as they run around the room and attack the most strong or threatening looking people first. So I've done the exact same thing, but I've described it in such a way that somebody new can envision or visualize the scenario. And then I say to them, Neil, what do you want to do? Right. And now it's, what do I want to do?
I got this image in my mind. This is what's happening.
Right. And so, and that keeps it fresh. It keeps it new for everybody. One of the things that I always caution parents about when you start gaming, tabletop role-playing games, because it's in our imagination, and like you said, it's a simulation, visualizing and training, it's more intense. When you've got the controller in your hand and you're leaning back in your most comfortable chair playing a video game, there's a screen between you and the danger, right? And when you're watching a movie, it's the same thing. With a movie, it's even more so because it's happening to somebody else, right? But when you're playing a tabletop role-playing game, it's happening to you. And so when you're playing with younger kids, one of the things that you want to be very cautious of is the descriptors, okay? And one of the examples I use is depending on what kind of media they're consuming, determines on whether, the bad guys are getting knocked down or they're getting disemboweled and blood and guts are splattering everywhere, right? So, but I'll give you another example of how kind of being in tune with your audience is very important when you're running a game. When you use intense descriptors, again, we're in October and we're getting ready for Halloween, and a lot of people are running horror games and things like that. So I ran a sci-fi ghost story game, but I didn't tell the players, which were my children and my wife, I didn't tell them it was a ghost story. I just thought, what a fun thing for Halloween. And it was close to Halloween that year. And so they were playing a science fiction adventure. And so they're all these sci-fi heroes, a bounty hunter, a robot, all these things, right? And I said, okay, the scenario is this almost like Jabba the Hutt type of character has hired you to steal a power supply for him. But they're heroes, but they've got to steal it because they've got to get information from them that could save the galaxy, right? So it's one of those Guardians of the Galaxy kind of situations. We're doing bad things, but we're trying to save the day. Well, the place that they have to steal it from is the bowels of a giant space station. So they get all the way down to the bottom of the space station, and it's supposed to be abandoned. And then they find all these aliens who are like refugees living at the bottom of the space station. Well, I took some cues from like Poltergeist and Phantasmagoria and all those 80s movies that had to do with hauntings and things like that. And I put them in a blender and served it up without telling anybody what they were about to have a sip of. Well, I had the little alien girl be the person who's interacting with the heroes. All the other refugees are kind of ignoring them. And the little alien girl's like kind of showing them around. And one time they see a hobo alien He's got a bad cough, and they try to interact with him, but he doesn't respond to them. They look away, and then they look back, and he's gone. And they're like, where? And the little girl goes, he had to leave, right? Creepy stuff. And so they go through the scenario. Well, long story short, we get to the little girl tells them that there's a monster that comes out and tries to eat them if it gets cold down here. And now I'm drawing on aliens, right? and so she says, if it gets cold, they come out, or it gets dark, they come out, right? And they're like, oh my gosh, now they're in a moral dilemma. If we take the power supply, these people will be in danger. And if we don't, the whole galaxy is going to be lost, that kind of thing. So I liked putting them in that. So the kids were younger. They were about 10, 9, 8, I'd say. And I got all into it. I was so excited, and it was going so well. And they were just piecing it together from the clues. Wait a second. I think these people are ghosts. I don't think they're really here. Right. And they're starting to piece it together. And they say, you know what? Let's get the power supply and let's get out of here. So they get the power supply. And I said, okay, your flashlights turn on because the lights are going out. And the little girl says, it's coming. And she runs away. And there's a roar. I got all theatrical. I got up from the dining room table and I hit the lights. It's not pitch black. It's not pitch black. There's still like the light over the oven on, right, in the kitchen. So, but it was too intense. It was too intense. They just figured out that they were in a ghost story. They just figured out that they just heard the monster noise, and then the lights go out, and the 8-year-old just loses it. Leaves the table, leaves the table crying. The next one up is like, oh, I don't want to play this.
Way to go, Dad.
My wife looks at me and goes, what is wrong with you? But I got so into it. I was like, oh, I thought they were having a good time. So definitely be cautious when you're playing with younger kids. Just try to, and she said, well, when it was over, the debrief, right? She says, well, what were you thinking? And I said, well, I just put a little poltergeist, I put a little phantasmagoria, I put a little aliens, and I just blended it all up. I thought it'd be a nice treat. And she goes, have they watched any of those movies? And I went, oh, no. And she goes, yeah. Why haven't they watched those movies? I was like, well, it's probably going to be too into. I see what you're saying there.
I see the flaw in my plan.
She's like, and they're not curled up on a couch with a blanket. They were in it. You put them right in the action, and they had to get out of there. So definitely take that
be aware.
That cautionary tale.
Yeah, be aware of the route and the story that you're taking them on. So I want to, we're coming up on time, and I want to be respectful of your time. I really appreciate you coming out. This has been awesome. Like I said, a lot of times in these, the podcast has gotten real serious, and it's nice to be lighthearted and just talk about something fun, like game night, all the different things you can do. And it doesn't have to be a role game. It doesn't have to be a role-playing game. It doesn't have to be sports. It can be a lot of different things. It can be cards. We were teaching, Cindy and I love playing cribbage because we're old. And, we were even teaching the 7-year-old to the point where like it was helping him with math because it's a counting type game. You never know where the benefit's going to come from. Right. And I remember my parents being, when I was young, my parents would have game night and they play cards with their friends. I don't know what they were playing, some weird game. And, but just the fact that you see people playing games, you see them interacting, you're building community, and it's lighthearted and it's fun. It doesn't always have to be so serious all the time. And you talk about wanting to build connection. How do I build connection with people? I don't know, like try playing a game sometime. Like, they always talk about sports are a great connector, or, some type of outdoor activity. It doesn't have to be that big and grand. Like just put a game on the table and play a game, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. We'll play, Mason and I, 7-year-old, we'll do Monopoly Junior, and in 15 minutes we've gone through 3 games, and he's like, let's play again, and I'm like, no man, like I can only play so much Monopoly Junior, let's play something else. But at least then it keeps going. And you go to the store, you go to Target or you go to Walmart or some other stores, and you're starting, oh, there's the game section, let's go see what they got, and pretty soon you're playing Exploding Kittens and all these other different games that are out there. I'm like, this is totally ridiculous, but it's so much fun.
So much fun. And
so something I wanted to throw out real quick is last question, and then I want to wrap up. But when I think of where's an easy place to start, you talked about telling stories, right? And the first thing that came to my mind was the old Choose Your Own Adventure books. Yes. So you don't even have to create a story. Like, the story's there. You read 2 or 3 pages and you have a choice. Do you want to do this? You go to page 58, you do this, go to 100 page, 126 or whatever it is. And then, pretty soon you got 3 fingers in the book. Cause nope, I want to go backwards. Cause but you don't have, if you feel like I'm not so creative, I don't know how to tell a story. You don't have to. Like, there's games and there's books that all you have to do is read it, and bedtime, and you can find age appropriate. And maybe if it's a little more edgy, doing it noon instead of bedtime. Right. But I think kids can handle a lot more than we give them. Because again, I look back and we were watching Nightmare on Elm Street and Freddy and Jason and all these different characters, like, scared the shit out of me. I hated those movies, but all my friends were watching them and they were just fine, so that's the first thing I think of is if you're looking for some place to start, look up a Choose Your Own Adventure book and read it with your kids. You might find yourself reading them yourself. But where would you tell people to start? Because there's so much out there.
There's so many things. Now, one of the things I do want to point out is there is something that's kind of new. It's just been around for a little bit, but there are these crossover board game role-playing games. So the board game role-playing games don't require a dungeon master. So like you were saying, if you're not real creative, if you're not quick on your feet with the improv and that kind of thing, or you just don't feel comfortable describing scenarios, all of that, you can get the books and just read them out loud. And that works great. And like I said, those box sets will get you started. But if your family is mostly board game oriented, there are games like Escape from Castle Strahd, and there are Mice and Mystics is a great one where the kids get to play mice or knights who have been transformed into mice. And so, and it's it's a role-playing game, but it all takes place on a board. It has maps in the board thing, and no one is the dungeon master. It just works like a real board game. The difference with tabletop role-playing games that I do want to emphasize for anyone who may not have a lot of experience with them is that unlike Monopoly, and games like Risk that are known to tear families apart if they get serious enough, right? The role-playing games, one of the biggest aspects of it is it's cooperative. So everyone at the table is working together towards a team win. So it's very team building. It's very trust building. And so that is one of the aspects of tabletop role-playing games, because we play lots of games too. We have tons of board games, card games, things like that. There's a card game we play called Munchkin, which will make people,
I love that game,
lose their mind. They will flip the table. I mean, it'll make you mad. and so we have games like that, and we love those games. But tabletop role-playing games, especially for those dads who are listening to your show tonight, who are looking for ways to bring everyone a little bit closer, playing a game where one person isn't getting teamed up on, or there isn't just one winner, is definitely a step in the right direction. And tabletop role-playing games will do that for you.
And that's a good point, because I think back, playing things like, I never really got into Risk. My brothers did, but we did play a lot of Monopoly. And I can't think of a single time where we finished a game because either somebody got caught cheating, somebody admitted to cheating and quit because they were bored, or the board got flipped and one person was crying and one person was mad and there's a wrestling match. Like, I can't think of a single time that we actually finished a Monopoly game. But yeah, you're right. Like, there's it doesn't always have to be competition. Like you can build your family and basically like when we were kids, like you were building a clan, man. Like and then you see the kids at school and I'm pointing at my brother's friends and suddenly we're like, hey, what's going on? Like, you build this camaraderie over something. It's a creative game, but you're creating this world and this opportunity for your kids, and then in turn for you to just let it all go. And you know what? Today I'm not me. I'm my whatever character tonight, and we're just gonna have some fun. And I remember when we were kids and we used to get laughed at and poke fun, but I'm like, you know what? I don't care. I had so much fun. Just the imagination and the creativity and the camaraderie of, oh yeah, we're doing this together. And, I still talk to my brother from time to time. He's like, hey man, I got this online D&D thing. And I'm like, man, it sounds like so much fun. I'm just so busy, but I'm to the point now where I'm like, why not? Why am I not doing this? At 47 years old, why am I not playing Dungeons and Dragons anymore?
Well, Neil, I'll tell you what, that commitment to having to play in a campaign is a killer for me too. But the next time I have one of those quarterly one-shot 4-hour ones, I'll definitely throw you an invite.
Yeah, definitely hit me up. I'll invite my brother and my nephews, and yeah, we'll figure something out. So Nick, your podcast is Raised on D&D. And of course, like if you do a basic Google search, it's going to be all over the place, just like mine is. I really appreciate your time. This has been great. I love the emphasis on creativity and inclusiveness and what you can do to build. People are always asking, well, how do I do this thing? How do I build connection? How do I deconflict, the tension in the house? Play games, man. Enjoy each other's time. And it's got to be something that you do intentional over time. It's not something that you can do, all structured. It's got to be an organic, hey, we're going to do this thing and we're going to have some fun. And, and mandatory fun every once in a while, the kids are like, no, I don't want to turn off the iPad. You know what? No, we're going to have some fun tonight. And we do that at our house. And the 9-year-old is usually the one who's like, no, I don't want to play. And we're like, no, you're going to play. By the end of the game, he's the one that had the most fun. So it's games are fun, man. And I really appreciate you coming out here and reinforcing that ability and something so simple that can bring not just the family, but communities together.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, Neil.